Radio Network. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, today joined as usual by my co-host, Scott Karasik, live from a hotel.
Yep.
Today we're going to be talking about the Falcons' Week 1 loss to the Philadelphia Eagles, get Scott's thought in that game. We'll also talk about their upcoming matchup against the Carolina Panthers. There's a lot of roster moves that we got to catch up on, so we'll start off the show there. But, of course, we'll always answer you guys' mailbag questions as well. So, Scott, as we often do, we start the show off talking about any roster moves that have occurred in the last week since we did a show. The Falcons made a ton of moves basically since last Tuesday. They added 3 veterans to the roster: defensive end Steven Means, safety Keith Tandy, linebacker Corey Nelson. They elevated running back Brian Hill from the practice squad to the roster. They made a couple of additions to their practice squad: Richard Jarvis, Julian Williams, Christian Blake, Prince Charles Iwara. They put 2 players on injured reserve in Deion Jones and Keanu Neal. They cut Jeff Overball, the long snapper. They cut cornerback Deontay Burton, and they dumped Jacob Tuodi Mariner from the practice squad. Obviously, the big moves are the addition of Means, Tandy, and Nelson. Of course, our first mailbag question, as usual, comes from Evan Birchfield. He asks, how do Keith Tandy, Stephen Means, and Corey Nelson fit with the Falcons?
I think Keith Tandy is that ultimate special teams guy. So you're going to see him as not your Keanu Neal replacement. He's more your DeMonte Casey on special teams replacement. When you get to Stephen Means, he's a very rotational kind of pass rusher. Aaron, you know a little bit more about him than I do, but I definitely see him as that true rotational pass rusher. And then Corey Nelson, I think people are overblowing what his actual role with the team's going to be. I see him as a Kamal Ishmael, Ike Reese, depth linebacker, special teams guy. I don't see him as anything more than that here in Atlanta.
Yeah, no, I think those are all fair assessments. I think Nelson, has a little bit of ability. We'll have to see. I think he's basically their insurance policy in the event that either Foye Olakun or Duke Riley really struggle over the next couple of weeks at linebacker, and they basically like, well, I guess we just got to play Kamal Ishmael and Corey Nelson. But so he also helps on special teams, as you said. I think, yeah, you're right. Keith Tandy's primarily going to be more of a special teams guy, but I think he does fit sort of what the Falcons want in that role. He's, in Tampa, he played a lot of cover too. He's a pretty good run defender. And like sort of that playing that cover 2 role is similar to what, you ask Keanu Neal to do in the zone when you're playing that middle zone. It's just basically like breaking on stuff over the middle and whatnot. And, Stephen Means, I think, is a very talented pass rusher, was always sort of lost in the shuffle in Philadelphia just because of how deep their rotation was always productive when he was on the field, whether that was in the regular season or in the preseason. So I'm optimistic that he'll be able to eventually carve out a role as a rotational player in the Falcons pass rush, particularly, given that, that was a question mark for a lot of people, given that, between Brooks Reed, between Vic Beasley and Takk McKinley, I think the Falcons probably are okay, but if they can have another guy in there that is on a comparable level as those guys that can bring the heat, I think Stephen Means could be that guy. So we'll see sort of how many reps he gets.
Reed or Shelby are that kind of guy, so you need to have that third true pass rusher, even if all he does is rush the passer.
Yeah. Which is probably what he'll wind up doing, just primarily be a pass rusher.
And special teams guy.
Yeah. Let's move ahead and talk about the Eagles game. I gave my thoughts on this game on a quick show, a 10-minute episode I did on Tuesday night. And let's get Scott's thoughts on this game. I'm sure he has plenty. And I'll just give you the floor, Scott. What do you want to say about last week's Eagles loss?
Well, losing Keanu Neal does absolutely blow. Losing Deion Jones absolutely sucks too, but that's for less time. The benefit of being in a hotel is you hear the dog squeaker. I apologize if you guys heard that. Just felt like they were a team trying to work some things out, even through the first game. They didn't really seem to have the red zone situation fully mapped out. Matt Ryan played probably the worst game he's played in 3 years, since 2015. I think the last time we saw Matt Ryan play that bad was against Indianapolis back in 2015. So, I mean, it was a bad game. It was a bad situation. I mean, it's one of those games that you can't really throw away because it was the defending champions. But at the same time, like, the more I watch of it, the more I'm like, I mean, there's a lot of positive here. And I'm not expecting a Super Bowl team the way everybody else is. I'm just expecting a solid overall football team. You know, give me a playoff 10-6, 11-5 type team, and that's what I'm expecting.
Yeah, I think that's fair. That's sort of what I thought coming into the season is where the Falcons are at, and I think watching them lose to the Eagles. For those of you that watched the show last week, I had them losing to the Eagles, so it wasn't completely surprised that they lost in the way that they lost. It's disappointing, obviously, because it was pretty much identical to how they lost last year. And, all the talk during the offseason about the improved red zone and how much they've been working on the red zone. And that's basically whenever you heard them talk in these post-practice press conferences at training camp would be all about, we've been working on our red zone stuff. And when push came to shove at the end of that game, it didn't look like they really had any more red zone plays. It was like Sark exhausted all his good red zone plays in the first half of the game, and there weren't that many good red zone plays in the first half of the game. So it leaves a lot to be desired in terms of what the Falcons have really made strides with. But it is what it is. The Eagles were going to be one of the tougher teams that they faced this year. So I'm not surprised that they lost, but it is disappointing, of course.
One thing I will say is the last series seemed kind of stupid with all the vertical calls. I wouldn't have hated like a horizontal crossers type play or a true pick play. If you're gonna force it to Julio, you might as well just run a pick clear out for Julio. Run the two guys, run Ridley and Sanu, and just pick them to the left, and then have Julio come underneath on the slant. And if you're going to force it to him, you might as well force it to him on the inside than the outside, is my thoughts. Because Julio's not really a fade route runner. Julio is more of a speed kind of football player. His best route, if you go back and watch every single Julio Jones touchdown, I would dare to say half of them come on slant routes or deeper crossers or digs where he's crossing over the middle of the field.
Yeah. Look, we could spend an hour talking about what they should have done in the red zone, which is pretty much anything that they did. Pretty much anything other than what they actually did on some of those last couple of plays. So, with that in mind, I think we have a couple of mailbag questions that do sort of touch upon that. But first, we got one from Devontae Hughes at Cookie by Nature on Twitter. He asked, what are your thoughts on Grady Jarrett not listening to Duke Riley in a critical red zone situation, the play where he ignores his orders to switch gaps, and the Eagles score?
The Eagles scored running the direction that Jarrett was saying, I'm going to stay here. Jarrett saw something there. Duke needed to trust him. I know that wasn't where Jarrett was supposed to line up, but they didn't cut back into Jarrett's gap. They went basically right where Jarrett was and then cut left.
Yeah.
He was telling Jarrett to basically go right, and Jarrett was like, no, this is where the play is designed to go. This is I know what I'm doing. Just back up and get where you're supposed to be, Duke. You're wasting time.
Yeah, Jarrett was right, basically. That's what basically Scott said. Jarrett was right. That's where the play went. Duke was wrong. So, obviously in that situation, I think, Deion Jones was out of the game briefly. And so Duke was calling the defense in that situation. But, yeah, I'll go with the 3-year veteran defensive tackle that was, can do what Grady Jarrett does versus what Duke Riley was asking him to do in that situation. So where the Eagles wound up running that play, it was exactly, as Scott said, where Jarrett was lined up. So he had it right. Jason at your boy J94 asks, should we worry Sark doesn't know how to get Ridley open, or were the Eagles just a bad matchup? What do you expect this week out of Ridley?
So I found a nice app where I could actually watch some All-22 on my phone. Thank you, NFL.com, for that. And yeah, I was kind of surprised when I saw a few plays, and I was like, Ridley's wide open. Ridley's wide open here. He's wide open here. He's wide open here. I think a little bit of it has to do with Matt Ryan doesn't fully trust him yet. So as the season progresses, those plays where you're like, man, why isn't Ridley getting the ball, are going to be, man, Ridley just made a 20-yard gain. That's awesome. Or holy crap, Ridley's just as good as Julio is what we're going to see on Facebook and Twitter. I'm already ready for it because he's getting wide open. Now, Ridley needs to learn better body positioning, but overall, Ridley he's getting open. He just has to learn better body positioning when the ball comes his way.
Yeah, look, Ridley had 2 targets in the game. What's typical in the NFL is if you're a number 3 receiver, you get like 3 or 4 targets. So it's not as if Ridley being underutilized by a huge margin with the 2 targets. As Scott said, if you go back and you watch all the 22, there were opportunities there for him. A lot of those opportunities, either Matt Ryan wasn't looking at him or the pressure was too much still. It would have made it next to impossible for Matt Ryan to complete a throw to him, even if he was looking at him. So I feel like it wasn't necessarily a Sark-related thing, or you could argue it's an Eagles-related thing due to their pressure. But I think a lot of it is sort of Matt Ryan not being completely comfortable with Ridley, and the reason why Julio Jones gets targeted 19 times isn't simply because that's the way the Sark schemed it up. It's a lot of it is in situations Matt Ryan isn't completely comfortable, and so he's going to throw the ball to the receiver that he's most comfortable is going to catch it. And that's one of the reasons why Julio had so many targets in this game. And that's basically what happened. And that's disappointing. That you can maybe blame on Sark, because one of the things that was apparent last year in the offense was that Matt Ryan wasn't completely comfortable a lot of times. And in those instances, he has a tendency to force the ball to Julio Jones. You saw that last year. You saw that in 2015. You certainly saw that in 2013 and 2014. So that's not a good sign for the health of the offense overall when you see Julio get that many targets. So that's part of it, but I do think we'll have opportunities, as Scott said, where Ridley's going to have some, solid performances moving forward. It just didn't necessarily work out against the Eagles. Evan Birchfield has a bunch of questions. How would you split the percentage of the blame on the Falcons' loss? Sark, Ryan, etc.
Ryan 60%, Sark 30%, Dan Quinn 10%.
Okay. I'll go the offensive line 25%, Sark 20%, Ryan 20%, no pass rush 20%, and then everything else that you could possibly think of fills out the last 15%, if my math is
15%, yeah.
Yeah. I thought I was trying to add it up to 80, but I didn't add it up to 80. So, 15%. So, that's things like special teams, Devontae missing a block, drop passes, all those sorts of things just kind of add up to about 15%. So, I would put most of the blame on the offensive line. They just did not perform well, but Sark and Ryan are very close seconds and thirds.
I think the offensive line performance falls on Sark. Because I think when you're sitting there calling long developing plays after seeing your offensive line get worked and worked and worked, that's on you. That's the shit Dirk Cutter used to do. So that's unacceptable to me. To me, that's on Sark. So if I'm seeing my offensive line get worked, you know what I go for? I run screens. I run short, quick hitting slants. I run, basic, simple concepts in the passing game like mills and scissor concepts, just so that I can, a 5-yard scissor so that you get someone open, and just hope Ryan plays the way he can. By sitting there and getting these long developing screwy plays, after a certain point, it's just quit with all the crap and just run offense. At a certain, you just got to quit with the crap and run some offense.
That's fair. I certainly think at the end of the game, the offensive line breakdowns, particularly on that last drive, were probably 100% on Sark. I would agree there. I think he did do some stuff early in the game that helped to try to mitigate the offensive line performance, but it didn't quite work because I don't think the offensive line was really playing up to the par. But, yeah. Evan's next question is the brother of the week for week one, the player who did the most for the team that won't get the love from the media or whatever the criteria that Evan used to have.
Rico Allen. I'd say Ricardo Allen coming in, playing free safety, doing well, then switching over to strong safety, performing well. Rico had a hell of a game, and no one noticed it. Not a single person's talking about how good of a game he played. And I think it's because he plays safety, mainly a deep free safety, that no one's talking, which it can be a good thing when no one knows your free safety's name. It means he didn't get any turnovers, but at the same time, it also means he did his job. He didn't give up any big plays. I think the Eagles had maybe one explosive play all day, if I'm counting right.
There wasn't many.
Yeah, there wasn't many explosive plays. It was death by a million paper cuts. So when you look at the Eagles' offense, they scored, 2 touchdowns and a field goal and a 2-point conversion? They had 3 scoring drives. They had, I think, 12 total drives, and they only had 2 touchdowns on those. That's the defense doing its damn job. The offense needed to do its damn job.
It's a good pick. I'm going to go with the guy that's been getting a lot of heat on Falcons Twitter over the last 48 hours because he's been hurt. I'm going to go with Devontae Freeman. I think Devontae Freeman had a good game. I think, unfortunately, the injuries cut it short. I know everybody focuses on that sack he gave up, which was obviously not a good play for him. But when you go back and you look at his running, he ran the ball very well. It's just the problem was he got hurt at a certain point.
He got hurt on was that sack. If you go back and watch it, he doesn't play after that sack.
There you go.
And I think it was a combination of the way he was blocking and the fact that Jordan Hicks kicked his knee that caused it.
Yeah. You rarely see Devontae get run over like that. Like, you can see him, whiff on a block, trying to cut a guy and whiff on a block, but him getting run over. So that's a good point. But, I think when you look at, one of the criticisms you could level at Sark was that they didn't run the ball enough on first down because they had a lot of success running the ball on first down with Devontae. He was 4 for 4 in terms of his success rate on first down. Tevin Coleman was 2 for 6, I think. And so one of the things that I think hurt them in the game was as the game wore on, they couldn't, rely on Devontae to run the ball and get them into some second and third and manageable situations, which could have potentially taken some pressure off of the Falcons' offensive line, particularly on third downs when they're pass protecting. So I feel like, people throwing a lot of heat at Devontae's way as if he played poorly in that week 1 game. He did not play poorly. He made a mistake, obviously, had one bad play. But it's one of those things where it's when Devontae comes back, whether it's this week or the week after or whenever, the Falcons' offense is going to be very beneficial for it. And I think, people shouldn't mistake the fact that, he didn't have this huge yardage total or whatever for him performing poorly in that game. He played very well until he got hurt.
I agree.
Evan's next question is a similar one. Who impressed you the most / least in week 1?
Honestly, I can't think of anyone that impressed me the absolute, that really just stood out. I would say the most surprising player based on the amount of playing time he had was Damontae Kazee. I thought he was doing everything he needed to do, and then popping that ball out for that Deion Jones interception, that was impressive to me. Right when the Falcons needed it, he delivered. Impressed me the least, I hate saying this name, Ryan Schrader. He just could not handle the pass rush coming on that side. And I don't think I've ever seen a game this bad from Schrader since 2013. He just looked overmatched, which it will happen in the NFL. You will have times when you're overmatched. But for a guy like Schrader, who should have gone to 2 Pro Bowls already, it's weird to see.
Yeah, I think the Schrader pick is a good one for the guy who was the least impressive. You said 2013. I think it was that season finale against the Panthers in 2014 was the last really bad game where Charles Johnson was kicking his butt and Greg Hardy was kicking Jake Matthews' butt that game. I think that was 2014.
Yeah, that was 2014. That was Mike Smith's last day.
Yeah. And the player that impressed me the most, I'd probably go with Deidrin Senat, just because I thought he had a really good game against Jason Kelsey. And, the interesting thing is like when Grady Jarrett was playing that nose tackle spot the last couple of years, and when we would face the Eagles, he would have a pretty quiet performance against Jason Kelsey. And to see Deidrin Senat coming into the game and really sort of give Jason Kelsey more than he could handle in the first half of that game. I think as the game wore on, I think Senat and other guys started to wear down, and the Eagles' offensive line were able to win more matchups in the second half than they did in the first half. But the fact that you could say Deidrin Senat had two really good quarters against Jason Kelsey is certainly very impressive, because based off of what he did this preseason, while I was impressed at times with what he did, it wasn't consistent. And so for him to come out and go up against arguably, you probably put Frederick, Mack, and Kelsey and one of the Pounceys as your top four centers in the league, and to basically face a top four center and, look good against that guy for at least a half of a game is very impressive to me. So Deidrin Senat would be my pick.
And you're only saying a half of a game because he played 50% of the snaps, right?
No, I'm saying like in the second half he was not as effective as he was earlier in the game. It wasn't that he was playing poorly in the second half, but like he was, I don't want to say dominating, but he was like overwhelming Kelsey in the first half. And then in the second half, it was like Kelsey was winning more than he was losing. And that's what I mean. But even two quarters of overwhelming Kelsey is two more quarters than I expected him to have.
So I think part of that had to do with they were starting to chip him a little bit with the guard in the second half to help make sure that he was in Kelsey's center or that Kelsey could play half man. So while, he did kind of disappear a little bit the second half, it wasn't because of him. It was because the Eagles switched up in game plan. Atlanta should have turned back around and started using him in one tech instead of at zero, because they used him at zero a lot and he was playing well. But I'd love to see him as a permanent one tech. Especially against the Eagles, because I think they don't handle unbalanced tech very well. Like 1-3-5 or 1-3-6 type stuff.
Fair enough. Let's move forward and talk about this week's matchup against the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers are coming off a Week 1 win against the Dallas Cowboys. This is the Falcons' home opener. Obviously, the Falcons don't want to fall into an 0-2 hole. I forget the stat, but it's something like, teams that start 0-2 are like 80% likely to miss the playoffs. So it's probably even higher than that, or whatever it is. So obviously, this is, I don't want to call it a must-win game, but certainly a game that the Falcons, will be a huge win for them at this point in the season, especially given some of the injuries that they're going to be dealing with this week. Not having Deion Jones and Keanu Neal, both of those guys went on IR. Question marks about whether Devontae Freeman's going to play this week with the knee injury that he suffered last week. I don't think he's going to play, but I think the Falcons are sort of like playing that game of like, oh, we'll make a decision and we'll find out soon. But I don't think that he's going to play. I don't think
he is either.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they brought Brian Hill up to the practice squad on Monday or Tuesday kind of told you that he's not playing this week. Because if it was, they were waiting to see how he was going to do, they would have waited till the end of the week to bring up Hill.
I agree.
You also have Ben Garland is probably not going to play. Russell Gage is dealing with the knee injury. He's questionable. Isaiah Oliver is still recovering from his ankle injury. Brian Poles got an ankle injury. Andy Levitre didn't practice today or was limited today with an elbow injury, so his status is up in the air. It does seem like Austin Hooper is going to be okay with the ankle injury that had him limited earlier this week on Wednesday. Marvin Hall and Josh Harris should be back as well. The Panthers are also dealing with a bunch of injuries. You got Gerald Williams, who went on IR, their right tackle, with a knee injury. Greg Olson's going to be out for a while. They didn't put him on IR, but he's not playing for at least a month with a foot injury. Trey Turner is in the concussion protocol, so he's definitely questionable.
That's huge.
Yeah, because, that basically means that they're going to have two new players on the right side of their offensive line this week if both Turner and Williams miss this game. In addition to the fact that Taylor Moton and Greg Van Rotten, their left tackle and left guard, respectively, basically are, this will be like one of their only starts in the league because they're young guys that are inexperienced. So there's some opportunities for the Falcons pass rush. Their kick returner, Demir Bird, is questionable with a knee injury. C.J. Anderson, the running back, was sat out practice yesterday, but he's going to be fine. He was sick or something like that. So a lot of injuries, and I guess the question I have to ask you, Scott, is which team do you feel like is going to be hurt more by some of these key injuries, Falcons or Panthers?
I think the Panthers playing 3 little kids and 2 mid-sized draft picks, and then Ryan Khalil as their 5 linemen and tight end is going to have a huge impact on the game. Like, the Panthers aren't going to be able to run the ball the way they think they can, the way that they're going to try to, with a line that is piecemeal. Like, yeah, it's a second-round pick, but then it's Van Roten, who's blah. It's Khalil, who is an aging veteran. And then Sila Tolu, and I don't even know who's playing right guard with Trey Turner out. Like, I don't know the Panthers that well when it comes to, like, their third-string offensive line.
I think Sila Tolu, if Turner doesn't play, Sila Tolu will play right guard, and I think they'll probably start Corey Robinson at right tackle.
Okay, they don't have anybody really talented playing on that right side.
No.
So attack that side all day with Vic Beasley and Grady Jarrett and see those 2 guys combined for 4 sacks. Like, I honestly think you could have an easy, very good 4-man rush.
Yeah, I think both teams are going to be hurting by injuries. I think the fact that the Panthers' injuries are on that offensive line certainly sort of help the Falcons in the regard because their injuries are mostly on the defensive side of the ball. So it kind of balances each other out. So we'll sort of see how those things mesh together. With that in mind, let's talk about some of the battles on the trenches. Let's flip sides and talk about the Falcons' offensive line going up against a pretty tough Panthers defensive front. We know Kawan Short typically has good games against the Falcons. He usually dominates Andy Levitre. The fact that Levitre is dealing with an elbow injury is probably not going to make that matchup go in the Falcons' favor. But, we kind of go into these games knowing Kawan Short's going to have a big game. It's really more about containing the other guys up front. And with Mario Addison and Julius Peppers and now Dontari Poe, Scott, what are your thoughts on sort of if the Falcons' offensive linemen will have a bounce-back game and be able to take care of business against some of those other guys?
That's going to be tough. While, again, Dontari Poe is awesome, going against them in the run game with Short, Poe, Addison, Peppers, I mean, they've got depth, they've got rotation. That's just a tough defensive line to go against. And while I do like the Falcons' offensive line as a whole, they need to have a really good game to show out against that Panthers defensive line.
I agree. Jake Matthews usually doesn't have great performances against Mario Addison. And, one of the things I'll be curious to see if he can sort of bounce back. Schrader, again, coming off a very poor performance, is going to be facing Julius Peppers, who's not the player that he was in his prime, but certainly is a guy that if you're not ready to play, he can take advantage of you. So this is going to be a tough front for the Falcons to run the football against. There have been games where Tevin Coleman has gone off against the Panthers. There have been games where he's been quiet. So we're going to definitely need the Falcons' running game to get a little bit more heavily involved in this game and go up against what has been consistently one of the better run defenses in the league the last couple of years. So that's going to be a tough matchup, and it's going to start up front for the Falcons.
That being said, on the flip side, I don't see the true pass rush ability outside of Kawan Short on that Panthers defensive line. So Ryan should have time to let these plays develop, especially if they get a little bit of a run game and start forcing these 6 and 7 man boxes versus an 8-man box. With the pass game, you're going to see the run game start to the run game's going to get going, and then you're going to end up seeing the Falcons really do well. So right now, it's not ideal, but I think long term, I think if they focus the game plan right and use the pass to open up the run, they'll be able to dominate the Panthers. Because I don't think Luke Kuechly, he's injured. He's not 100%. You know, you can kind of go after him a little bit more than you normally would. I think their corners are just okay. I don't think they really have safeties. Like the Falcons can go against this defense and create yardage pretty easily. The question is whether they can do more than just create yardage, is whether they can create points.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That was the next matchup I was curious to get your thoughts on, Scott, because I think James Bradbury is a good corner. I think whoever he's covering, with the exception of Julio Jones, he should be able to hold his own against Ridley and Sanu when he's lined up against those guys. It's the other two corners that the Panthers have that I have question marks about. Captain Munnerlyn, once upon a time was a very good nickel cornerback, but I don't think he's that guy anymore. Dante Jackson, while is a talented young cornerback, he has never seen a human being like Julio Jones in his lifetime. And I feel like the Falcons need to maximize how many opportunities they can line up Julio against Dante Jackson, who lines up at the right cornerback spot. And the Panthers typically don't flip their corners. They have dabbled at times with having Bradbury.
And Falcons typically have Julio lined up on the left.
Yeah.
So that means that it's going to be Julio on Dante Jackson pretty much all day. And those deep crossers that Julio Jones loves to run, that we saw him run against the Packers, against the Panthers, against, pretty much everybody. He'll run that deep crosser at some point. And if he hits it in the right spot, if Ryan hits him in the right spot, that's 7. No matter where you are on the field, that's 7 points if you hit him on that deep crosser. And Dante Jackson reminds me a lot of a young Robert Alford. Very good, but very handsy, and probably should have done what Alford did and take a year behind a true veteran, as opposed to get thrown into the fire with shit technique.
I agree. What I was going to say is, I think there's been a time or two where the Panthers have asked Bradbury to shadow Julio in some of these games. So I'll be curious if they do that again, just so they can avoid that matchup that Scott just outlined. But even still, whoever is on Dante Jackson, I think the Falcons should attack him. Like, Dante Jackson's not a big corner. So if you put Sanu out there, even though Jackson is way faster than Sanu, fast enough to probably run circles around Mohamed Sanu, the fact is that you just want to get Sanu these, throw fades to him and let him use his size to his advantage, where Jackson's just not going to be able to match up size-wise. Or, we saw Calvin Ridley perform well against Dante Jackson in college, so there's no reason to
destroyed him in college.
So there's no reason to think that he won't do it again in the pros. So basically the point is, I think, wherever Jackson is on the field, probably on that right side of the field, more likely, or right side of the defense, left side of the offense, the Falcons just need to attack that guy. And that's going to be sort of, they tried, I think they can have a lot of success doing that. So he, to me, is the biggest weakness in that secondary. He's probably the biggest weakness on that entire defense, just given how good their defensive front is and in their linebacker core, even without Thomas Davis. Like, Shaq Thompson is probably the best third linebacker on any team in the league. So it's not like they lose somebody, but it's not as if they suddenly bottom out at that position. So I feel like that's the one major weakness that the Falcons can really try to exploit and make Dante Jackson, his welcome to the NFL moment this week. And turning attention to sort of the opposite situation, with all the injuries that the Falcons have with Jones and Neal out of the lineup, their defense is going to have to be heavily focused on not only stopping the Panthers' running game, stopping Cam Newton's running ability, as well as Christian McCaffrey's ability as a runner and receiver, which is going to be the biggest task that the Falcons can do. And as we talked about earlier with the defensive line, it's going to start up front, because if the defensive line can control the line of scrimmage and basically do to the Panthers' offensive line what the Eagles did to us last week, then it will make all of those other things, it's a trickle-down effect where all of a sudden they can't run the football, Cam's under constant pressure, and his running ability is negated. So it really does start up front. The defensive line is going to have to shoulder the burden, because without Jones, without Neal, without those two leaders in the back end, you're going to lose something where you're trying to replace those guys with guys, getting tons of reps for Duke Riley and Foye Olakun, who I think are okay, fine, but not necessarily ready to shoulder the burden of being able to basically stop guys like McCaffrey and Cam Newton this early in their careers.
So the way I look at it is you're basically replacing Deion Jones with Duke Riley, and you're replacing Duke Riley with Duke Riley. Like Foye Oluokun is about as good as Duke Riley is.
Oh, okay.
That's what
that
I'm saying.
Sense.
Like,
okay,
you're basically just losing one guy. You're not really losing two in that situation. You're not having a downgrade at two spots. You're having a downgrade at middle linebacker. Your weak side linebacker is basically the same guy. I honestly think we could see Foye end up as the starting middle linebacker by the end of the season if Duke can't figure it out, which I would be perfectly fine with because he's from Yale. He can understand the defense. Smart dude. I mean, sometimes you just get guys and you're like, this guy is going to be good. And KJ Wright was a 6th-round pick. Maybe Oluokun's the same kind of guy, and we just don't see the same thing. Or maybe I see it, but maybe the analysts like D-Led and, even you don't see the same thing that I'm seeing in a guy who's very, very instinctual on the field and very, very athletic on the field and really just has to get those reps to be that guy. Like, I see a young Deion Jones in Foye Oluokun, which Deion Jones had some issues early on. He had some growing pains, but once he got through them, he was a Pro Bowl linebacker. I think you can get the same thing out of Oluokun. I don't know if Campbell's that guy. I do think Oluokun's that guy. I'm still kind of questioning Campbell myself.
Okay. Just so I don't get too accused of being negative, I think Oluokun. I'm going to be curious to see what he does, and I think my expectation is not that I don't think Oluokun is talented. I just think basically playing your second NFL game, we're not going to see that. Like that guy that you're talking about.
Agreed.
November, December, I think he could be that guy. I certainly am open to that possibility. But it's going to be a tough task this week, and that's why I think it's up to the defensive line to take as much pressure off of him, off of Duke Riley. I think Allen and Casey are a good combo of safeties, but neither of those guys do the same things that Keanu Neal does. So you're going to need the defensive line to basically whatever Allen, Casey are here, and Neal's up here or whatever, and they got to fill that gap. The defensive line has to basically create the pressure, control the line of scrimmage, and put the pressure. But obviously, the best defense for the Falcons is going to be a good offense, because if you can take out the Panthers' running game by going up 2 or 3 scores in the first half, that's good. That's better than anything the defensive line is going to do.
And forcing turnovers. That defense, let's call it what it is. The best defense isn't a good offense. The best defense isn't a good pass rush. The best defense is forcing them to throw you the ball, forcing them to drop the ball, and forcing them to just give you the ball. A defense that can force turnovers, that is the best defense. Because you get your offense in better field position, you end up scoring points sometimes on defensive touchdowns, and you take away a scoring opportunity for them. Turnovers can be up to 14-point swings. Very easily. So every turnover is worth 2 touchdowns in my eyes. Give me 2 touchdowns every single play. Go out there, get 5, 6, 7 turnovers. Again, unrealistic numbers. We might see 2 or 3. But if those 2 or 3 are, Cam Newton and the Panthers are at the 30-yard line of the Falcons, and DeMonte Casey picks the ball off and runs it back to the Panthers 30, that's 14 points in my book. Whether or not it's actually 14 points, whether the Panthers would have scored a touchdown there or not, or whether the Falcons score a touchdown in their own right, doesn't matter to me. That play itself is worth 14 points. It's going to help your win expectancy tremendously to get that interception.
Okay, I agree. Before we move on, we got a mailbag question from Evan Birchfield. Is Falcons defeat the Panthers if blank?
They force turnovers on defense, and they score with multiple times in the red zone. By multiple, I mean 2. You score 2 touchdowns in the red zone. You can probably get another 2 outside of it. So that's 4. Like, this could be a 35, 40-point game for the Falcons if they really... If Sarkisian figures his shit out, this is a 40-point game. If Sarkisian doesn't figure his shit out, they're losing. I mean, it's that simple.
Yeah, I was smiling because I was thinking, like, the Falcons defeat the Panthers if they score more points than they do. I was about to pull a Trent Dilfer with the basic analysis. I think that the offense and if the Falcons can control the line of scrimmage, I think they win this game. I think it's going to be a tough task for the offensive line, easier than it is against Philadelphia, but it's not as if this Panthers defensive line is crap. So if they can take care of business on the offensive line, have a rebound game, and if the defensive line can basically really get after Cam Newton and really stop the run, then I think they should be able to win this game. But pretty much, as Scott said, there's a whole bunch of things: turnovers, explosive plays on offense, attacking Dante Jackson, Tevin Coleman going off, Matt Ryan looking better at home. Get maybe a big play or 2 on special teams. All those variables that happen in every single week. There's a bunch of ifs that you could put in that blank. So we'll see what happens.
If Matt Ryan plays like Matt Ryan and not like Joe Flacco, we'll be okay.
Yeah.
Because he gave us a Joe Flacco last week, which he's only done 10, 11 times in his career, and most of them were his rookie year. So let's see Matt Ryan play like Matt Ryan can.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you. All right. Before we get to the rest of the mailbag proper, we do want to talk a little bit about our sponsor, MyBookie.AG. And using their mobile website, I can definitely check out some of their betting lines. It's very easy to use. You guys should definitely sign up with MyBookie.AG. For those of you that are curious about this upcoming Falcons-Panthers game, the Falcons, even after their injuries, are still favored by 6 points in this game, which is sort of baffling to me. But, Vegas has been very much on the Falcons bandwagon, so Vegas clearly thinks they know something that we don't know. So we'll see about that pick. I said on Tuesday, I don't necessarily – I feel like you kind of have to take the Panthers on the points here, even if you think the Falcons are going to win, because I don't think the Falcons are going to – they don't ever really blow out the Panthers. It's a division game, so I don't know.
Did you watch both games in 2016?
Well, come on. 2016 – Scott, it's Kyle Shanahan, man. Come on. Like, we know that's not coming back, right? We know we're not dropping 35 on the Panthers with Sark, right?
Man, let me call the offense. I would just call straight up like Shanahan money plays all the time. Oh, Yankee route, fuck it. Like,
I can see, Scott. What you would be doing? You'd have the 2016 game on the monitor, and you just be like looking at it every play. Call that play, and then you just call that down into this game, and just basically just copy the exact same playbook that they did in 2016.
And then they'd probably score 45 points, and people would go, "Man, that was the exact same play call sheet that Kyle Shanahan ran." Hey, What am I supposed to do?
Look, I wouldn't blame you. You're right. You'd probably score 45 points if you did that again.
Exactly. They scored 45 the first time they ran that play call sheet. Run it again. They also beat, Julio Jones also had a 300-yard game. Ben Wickery had to go to counseling before he came back, and he's with the Cardinals now, and he's got a little bit of more confidence, but he had to go to counseling for 2 years before he could get over that game. I'm not even kidding. Like, he literally had to go to counseling for 2 years to get over giving up 300 yards to the best receiver in the game.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Looking at some of the other games this weekend, looking at the MyBookie lines, last week I picked a favorite and an underdog that I'm going to bet money on. It's up to you guys to decide whether or not you decide to bet money on those teams. But the team that I like that is favored this upcoming weekend is, of course, the team that beat the Falcons last week. They're only favored by 3.5 points going on the road against the Buccaneers. I know the Buccaneers had this offensive explosion, but I don't think they're going to do that against the Eagles. So I'm pretty confident that the Eagles will more than cover a 3.5-point spread. My underdog pick is the New York Giants, who are +3. The Cowboys are favored at home against the Giants this week, and I feel like, I don't think watching the Cowboys last week against Carolina, I just don't think they're good. I know they typically do well against the Giants in these primetime games, but I feel like the Giants will take care of business. They have too many weapons on offense, and I just don't think Cowboys can score enough points to really do anything offensively. So those are my two picks. Take the Eagles, take the Giants. I'm all NFC East this week. I'm put all my money on those guys, and hopefully get some, add to my chicken wing budget potentially for the rest of the year.
Have you ever heard that football is a game of matchups? I would honestly take Dallas on that one, because while they don't match up well with Carolina, I think they match up well enough to destroy the Giants. I think Carolina is a playoff team this year. I think the Giants are a team that's competing for the number 1 pick this year. So, yeah, I don't see it. I really just don't see it. The Giants have no offensive line. The Giants have no defensive line. They haven't invested in a solid linebacker in a decade. Like, the Giants are going to fall apart pretty quickly. Oh, and Eli sucks.
Oh, look, there's no doubt about Eli sucking, but
Eli absolutely blows. He has no business being an NFL quarterback. This is one of those times where you're like, maybe they should play Davis Webb over Eli. Maybe that's a team that could sign Kaepernick and have a massive improvement. Even though Eli's the name, Kaepernick's way better. Like, that's the kind of quarterback Eli's become. He's become a below Dalton line quarterback. And by Dalton line, I mean Andy Dalton, the quarterback of the Bengals, who is the substandard average NFL quarterback, like number 25 out of all in the league. Eli Manning's below the Dalton line.
Look, you're not going to get any argument from me. Eli's terrible. I don't disagree with you at all. But I think the fact is that I don't think Dallas. It doesn't matter, because I don't think Dallas's defense, even if you have a bad quarterback, it's going to matter because they're good enough. I think Saquon's going to go off. I think Odell's going to go off. I think Evan Ingram's going to go off. Like, I don't see this Dallas defense really stopping anybody, even bad quarterbacks. So I'll take the Giants. If I'm wrong, then that's just less chicken wings I get to eat this year. So that's a risk I'm willing to make. All right, we got some mailbag questions. Brian at your homeboy Brian asks, if Steve Sarkisian doesn't improve by week 8 or so, do you think Dan Quinn will quietly let Greg Knapp take over play calling, similar to the way that Dan Quinn quietly took over play and calling from Richard Smith in 2016 after the bye week?
That actually makes a ton of sense. They're not going to outwardly fire him, but they'll be like, hey, Raheem, do you want to call plays? Hey, Morgan, the offensive line coach, do you want to call plays? Because if you think about it, the one guy who is on both staffs is Chris Morgan. And offensive line coaches are very underrated when it comes to play calling and understanding the offense. But they have to understand every play of the offense, because guess which 5 players play 1,000 snaps a year? The right tackle, the right guard, the center, the left guard, the left tackle. He has to manage 5 guys who every game have to hit their assignments right, have to hit them as a team. When you look at an offensive coordinator, it is basically an expansion on the offensive line coach duties. If you gave it to Chris Morgan, I wouldn't be shocked. So that'd be the other thought, is Chris Morgan could be that guy. And then the obvious name is Greg Knapp, former play caller, knows the scheme, actually probably could write the scheme better than Sarkisian could, and probably should have been hired instead of Sarkisian, looking back at it, for someone who actually runs a Shanahan-style scheme. But I digress on that. That's the other third guy. But Knapp's kind of failed a couple times as a play caller, so who knows with that situation.
Fair enough. I mean, I think it's possible. I can't say anything isn't possible at this point. I still think Dan Quinn would probably still ride with Steve Sarkisian. Like, I honestly, even though I'm down on Sark more than probably most, I feel like this Eagles game is probably going to be one of his like 2 or 3 worst games of the year. That's my expectation. So I feel like the arrow's still going to be pointing up. There, there's always going to be a game or two, the rest of the way where we're like, what is Sark doing?
Had 2 really bad games in 2016.
Yeah.
That first game against Tampa Bay, and then that Eagles game. I just think the Eagles have the Falcons' number.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I feel like, it's easy to speculate, like, when will he fire Sark? It's possible. That bye week in week 8 would be the time that if you wanted to, restructure the offensive coaching staff, that would be the time to probably do it if you're going to do it. But, I don't think it's going to be this bad for most of the season, so I feel like we're not likely to get that situation happening. But, whether it's Knapp, whether it's Morris, whether it's Morgan, there is a possibility that at some point, in a month or 2 or whenever, that, we'll hear about Dan Quinn being like, oh, yeah, well, we want this guy to be more heavily involved in the game planning and whatnot, which is a possibility, but I don't think it's a likelihood at this point. At D-Rock the Party, he asks, is the Falcons O-line fake good? Not saying they're bad, but if they're average instead of this top 10 O-line, many rate them as.
I would say they're closer to average than a top 10 O-line. I think at tackle, you've got a top 10 left tackle. I think you've got a top 5. Aaron says 4 center, so I'm with Aaron on that. They've got a top probably 10 right tackle. But at guard, they've got 2 average guards. They don't have great guards. And I think in today's NFL, guard is more important than tackle in some ways. Because a lot of the pressure that you create up the middle, you need good guards. The Falcons could next year take a guard in both the first and the second round, and it wouldn't shock me. Bo Benchweisel, and then, what's that dude's name from Denmark? I keep forgetting. There's a dude from Denmark. He plays for Arkansas. He's a beast. He's like 6'4", 320 pounds, and moves like Travis Frederick. Dude's a beast. Love watching him play. He's a Bo Bielema special, like Frederick was. So someone like him would be very fun to watch as a right guard next to Mac. So give me those 2 guys. I'll be more than happy with them.
Yeah, I think you're right about the whole guard thing, especially for the Falcons. Because Matt Ryan isn't like this mobile quarterback. Like you see in Green Bay, because of Aaron Rodgers' propensity to get outside the pocket and evade, to his left or to his right, they need to have good tackles. So if he gets interior pressure, he just, slides out to his left or slides out to his right. And I think that's been one of the reasons why Carolina has sort of done a poor job building around Cam, because I think Cam is more of that quarterback, but they've invested more in their guards than they have, or they've paid a lot of tackles, Matt Khalil, a lot of money, but they haven't had good tackle play over these last couple of years.
They haven't had good scouting on the offensive line outside of Norwell and Trey Turner. That's probably what it is.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying.
Scouting to know Ryan Khalil is good.
So, I think about the Falcons offensive line, I think the issue is it's kind of like quarterbacks, where it's like if you don't have one of those elite, with the quarterback with 3 or 4 or 5 quarterbacks in the league, then the next group of guys are good, but they're nothing special. That sort of Matt Stafford, Cam Newton, whatever tier that you want to put those guys, that second tier of quarterbacks that everybody agrees are good quarterbacks that can, help you win games in the postseason, but aren't necessarily like elite quarterbacks. Like if you have an offensive line like that, then teams like the Eagles, teams with good pass rushes, are still going to destroy you. So I feel like that's kind of the situation where only a handful of teams have those quote-unquote elite offensive lines that could go toe-to-toe with the Eagles pass rush, a healthy Dallas, The Eagles' offensive line itself is probably up there as well. I think there's only maybe 3 or 4 lines like that, and I don't think the Falcons are one of those 3 or 4. So
I can't list more than the 2 you listed. I'm just going to be honest with you, because I go around and I see Washington, maybe,
Yeah, Washington's the only other team if they're fully healthy. I'd be they got a shot.
Maybe Jacksonville, just because they've got a lot.
Last year.
Offensive line coach, they're shit. I'm just I can't think of a group of offensive linemen in the league that is actually good. Now, on the flip side, at least the Falcons don't have the Seahawks O-line.
Yeah. There's tiers of it, and I think the Falcons are sort of on that second tier. And so I think being on that, the point is even if you're quote unquote top 5 or top 10 or whatever, if you're on that second tier, good pass rushes are going to give you problems. The Falcons are going to struggle in 3 weeks against the Bengals, because Geno Atkins and Carl Lawson are just better than our offensive linemen. That's just simple as that. It doesn't matter even if we have a top 5 offensive line. Those guys are better, and they're going to beat those guys on a regular basis in that game. So, in terms of being does that qualify as being fake good in certain point of view? Maybe. But I think the other issue that we have to be concerned about with this offensive line is that they're kind of old, and at a certain point, when you're old, you lose it. The wheels fall off the track, and one hopes that the poor performances from guys like Schrader and Levitri last week, and even Alex Mack not having one of his best games as well, is just due to the fact that they were facing the Eagles' defensive line, not due to the fact that they're sort of approaching that 30-plus-year-old wall. So we'll have to see. That's going to be something we'll be on the lookout. It's not as if there's a shortage of good pass rushers and good defensive linemen that they're going to face over this first month of the season. So, how they perform against Carolina, New Orleans, and Cincinnati coming up is going to tell us a lot. So maybe they're fake good, but right now I think it's too early to tell.
And maybe Schweitzer might end up being a better fit at left guard, and if Levitri just can't play this week and they put Schweitzer there, maybe Schweitzer shows out better than Levitri. Maybe you need that extra bit of size that he has and that extra bit of strength that he has in a game like this, and he looks better and takes the job. I know injury shouldn't lose you a job, but a guy like Levitri, it is what it is. He's going to get paid. He doesn't care if he starts at this point.
Yeah. We got a couple more questions from Evan Birchfield. His first one is thoughts on the rest of the NFC South following Week 1.
New Orleans has absolutely no defense, but neither do the Bucs. And Carolina, I don't think Dallas is that good, and they struggled. They struggled to beat them. So it's going to be an interesting matchup this week. Atlanta should be able to win 4 to 5 games in the NFC South this year if Sarkisian gets his shit together. Now, if Sarkisian doesn't get it together, they're 1-5 in the NFC South. But if Sarkisian can at least come up with coherent game plans, they should at least win 4 or 5 of those games, which those 4 or 5 games is enough to get them to a winning record.
I thought Carolina played well in Week 1. I think they look like, we know what their strengths are. It's defense and running the football. And we'll still see what these injuries on their offensive line affect them. Obviously losing Greg Olsen is a big loss because that's been sort of their number one receiver these last couple of years, given the question marks at that position. We didn't really get to see DJ Moore a whole lot in Week 1. We'll see how he develops moving forward this season. So I think Carolina's in a good spot. They're basically what they usually are, which is a team that usually starts off slow and typically gets hot towards the second half of the season. And so, they're going to be a team that probably wins between 7 and 10 games this year. And I don't think anything that they did in week one should deter people from thinking that. Tampa Bay, really came off with an amazing offensive explosion that was unexpected. Like, I thought that's what they would look like offensively last year when I was hyping them up as a potential playoff team, which, all as usual falls flat on the face. So this year, the pendulum swung backwards, and I was like, oh, Tampa Bay's going to be lucky to win 3 or 4 games this year, which might happen if they wind up benching Ryan Fitzpatrick and Jameis Winston comes in and plays
No,
like his usual
I
self.
think the Buccaneers get destroyed this week. I think the Saints have no pass rush, and their linebackers can't cover. And Tampa was they were keying on that all game, and Lattimore was getting called for holding for once. So when Lattimore was getting called for holding, he couldn't hold all day. And when you can't hold all day and your name's Marshawn Lattimore, you look like crap because he's not good. He's basically Robert Alford entering second year. Yeah, he got a lot of love last year and went to the Pro Bowl. He had no business going to, but he held all the time. You go back and you actually watch the technique there. His technique is atrocious. He's grabby as shit, and he doesn't flip his hips when he's supposed to. And he is going to get burned a lot this year. Could he be the next Revis? Maybe. Is it going to happen right now? Hell no. Lattimore is going to get cooked a lot, and so is Crawley on the other side. Because they have no pass rush. 0.
Okay. Yeah, look, I think the Saints, my expectation for the Saints this year was their defense would take a step back. We saw that in week one. Jackson and Evans went off in that game, and they put their corners on an island against those guys, and they got beat, and they got burned quite a bit down the field against those guys. And I think that's, the issue. As you said, their pass rush is basically Cameron Jordan and not a whole lot else. Davenport, we'll see what he does this year. But as Scott and I discussed when we talked about the Saints offseason earlier this summer, it was like we don't have high opinions of Marcus Davenport and what he's going to do this year. So I think the rest of the NFC South, we know the Saints. The question is going to be, are they going to do better against teams that don't have a great pair of wide receivers like the Bucs do? The question to me with the Bucs is going to be: is their offense, is that a one-game blowout, or is this going to be the type of offense that we're going to expect to see not every week, but are we going to see like 6 games where the Bucs drop 30 and 40 burgers on teams this year? Maybe. I doubt it, but maybe. And if that's the case, then maybe the Bucs are a legitimate team that could make a push for a wild card spot or something like that this year. So the NFC South is always going to be competitive. It's too early to really call it one way or the other. I think most teams are probably on track to what you thought they would be going into the season. The Bucs offense looks better than I think probably most thought. The Falcons offense isn't quite as good as most thought. The Saints defense probably is not as good as most thought. But other than that, I think everybody's can easily get back on track over these next couple of games. Evan's next question is, I know it's only one game, but did you notice any differences between 2017 and 2018 Sark?
No.
Okay. I thought you could have followed up with that with Scott, but I think Sark did a little bit.
I don't. Like, what am I supposed to notice that's really different? It's one game, and same shitty red zone calls, same overthinking himself. Just, like, why call 3 plays out of the exact same package on 2 different red zone drives? He does it every time. Switch up your damn personnel. Like, holy crap. Would it kill him to go from 22 to 11 to 12 on 3 different plays in red zone? Or does he always have to stick with 22, 22, 22? Like, you fucking telegraph everything. That's what telegraphs it, your personnel. Because you can only do so much with it. And Sarkisian has not done anything different. He did it last year. He does it this year. He sticks with the same personnel over and over and over. Say Freeman, but instead, that receiver is a 6-foot tall Tevin Coleman. Tevin Coleman catches that pass. Even though it's not a great pass, Tevin Coleman catches it because he's tall enough. Because Matt Ryan kind of overthrew it. Hell, what if that receiver in that situation is Mohamed Sanu? He definitely catches that pass and creates that separation. They just overthink it too damn much and too damn often. And by keeping the same personnel every single play in there in the goal line, if he just would switch from one set to another while on the goal line, the Falcons would have more success. Just changing the personnel, because it forces you to call a play that you're not expecting to call. Change up the personnel, change the call, fix the entire red zone situation. Because I went back and watched 2016, and I went back and I watched 2017, and I charted all of it before the season, and I saw what was going on, and the times Kyle Shanahan even ran the same package of players on back-to-back plays in the red zone, you can count on one hand. Sarkisian, that is a feature of his offense. That is something that he does over 70% of the time. Over 70% of the time, he doesn't even bother to change the personnel in the red zone, especially in those goal-to-go situations. Is that someone we want running red zone play calling? You could take away his red zone play calling. Give him everything else. He seems to be okay with everything else. But take away the red zone play calls and let someone else pick a fucking play out of the hat, and they would do way better.